Just wanted to introduce our moderator for today's session. And so it's going to be led by Akin Oni, and he is a global projects executive with more than 3 decades of experience leading multi-billion-dollar energy, mining, refining, and infrastructure programs across most continents. He has many years of leadership experience in the natural gas and LNG EPC space at companies such as BHP, NNPC, Bechtel JV, and Cheniere Energy. As the current CEO of FTEX Group, he specializes in project strategy, governance, independent reviews, mega project delivery support, and people development, and is widely recognized for his ability to turn complexity into clarity. 2 of his 3 books are on track for release in March 2026. And for more information about Akin, you can visit his website, which is www.akinoni.com. And I think that's plenty of time now for us to get cracking. So Akin, I'm happily going to hand over to you as today's webinar moderator. And thanks very much to yourself and all the panelists for the upcoming conversation.
Thank you very much, Johnny. And good morning. Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today. The LNG sector has always been shaped by long horizons and hard choices. But as we look toward 2026, the distance between strategy and execution has never felt shorter or more unforgiving. Permits take longer, supply chains remain tight, talent is stretched, capital is cautious, and yet the demand signal is unmistakable. LNG remains central to energy security, affordability, and the global transition. That tension is what brings us here today. On behalf of the organizers of the Energy Projects Conference and Exhibition, North America 2026, thank you for joining us on this timely conversation and for creating a platform where owners, EPCs, and advisors can speak candidly about what it will really take to deliver the next wave of LNG projects successfully. I'm honored to moderate today's discussion alongside an outstanding panel of practitioners who have lived the realities of LNG delivery from concept through commissioning. With that said, the webinar title today is Executing the 2026 LNG Build-Out, Strategies for Cost, Risk, and Delivery. This event is a broad, forward-looking conversation designed to give our LNG community an insightful view of the main execution challenges and opportunities facing LNG export projects in North America in 2026. It's a jumping-off point for the annual Energy Project Conference and Exhibition, North America 2026, holding in mid-June 2026. That is approximately 4.5 months away. The discussion themes today include the current state of play, permitting and regulation for North American LNG projects, EPC market dynamics and evolving contracting strategies, schedule, cost, and supply chain risk heading into 2026, and finally, engineering trends such as modularization, digital delivery, and standardization. Today, we are joined by the following industry experts. First up is Roberto Vara, a senior LNG operator and project leader with deep execution experience. Roberto has been part of the Freeport LNG management team since 2013 and today serves as vice president, leading operations, maintenance, and capital project development. Prior to Freeport, Roberto's career spans engineering, operations, and leadership roles across LNG projects worldwide. He also serves on the board of Sixto and is a principal member of the NFPA 59A Technical Committee, helping shape global LNG safety and design standards. Roberto is a Texas registered professional engineer with more than 20 years in gas processing and LNG and brings a rare blend of operational rigor, project delivery, and governance perspective to this discussion today. Next up is Javid Talib, founder of JHT Consulting, and former vice president and managing director at Black & Veatch. He is one of the industry's most respected authorities on LNG and floating LNG execution. Javed brings over 5 decades of experience delivering EPC projects from concept through startup. For the past 25 years, his work has been squarely focused on LNG and FLNG, where he played a leading role in developing and commercializing floating LNG technologies. After 36 years at Black & Veatch, where he led LNG and FLNG project development globally, Javed founded JHT Consulting LLC, advising owners, developers, and investors on LNG and FLNG project strategy and execution. Javed brings rare depth at the intersection of technology, commercial structure, and delivery reality. And finally, I'm super excited to introduce Mike Britton. Mike is an LNG consultant and former project director at Freeport LNG. He is a practitioner with one of the deepest execution resumes in LNG. Mike brings over 5 decades in oil and gas, including 44 years with ConocoPhillips, where he spent more than 2 decades in project management, leading roughly $30 billion of major projects worldwide. Over the last 23 plus years, Mike's focus has been LNG, from delivering large-scale plants in Australia and Qatar to 6 years at Freeport LNG, following his retirement from ConocoPhillips. Today, Mike works as an independent LNG consultant, advising first-time developers and supporting M&A due diligence on LNG projects globally. Mike brings a rare combination of scale, scar tissue, and perspective to this discussion. Gentlemen, Roberto, Javed, and Mike, you are welcome to this webinar, and thank you so much for joining us today. Together, we'll explore the execution realities shaping North American LNG as we head into 2026. Not just what's changing, but what leaders must do differently if we want outcomes that match intent. This is not a marketing conversation, it's a practitioner's dialogue. Therefore, let's get right into it. As I mentioned earlier, we have 4 key themes that we're looking at, and the first is permitting and regulatory environment. And the objective of this theme is to separate structural constraints from execution choices. And I'm going to start this discussion with Mike. And Mike, here's my first question for you. How should project teams recalibrate their development schedules to reflect regulatory realities without eroding investor confidence? Mike.
Thank you very much, Akin, for that very nice and elegant introduction. And good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of our webinar participants, wherever you may be. This particular question, I think, has a very, very long time span to it, because we create project schedules all the way from starting FEL 1, 2, 3, and all the way through execution. We generally update those schedules monthly during execution. So lots and lots of project schedules. And the regulatory process, particularly here in the US, is always very, very prominent in those schedules, particularly here in the US in the early part of the project until you get your FERC order. So, but that uncertainty is generally driven in the early days by both the owner's rate at which they progress the work and file the applications. And then once the applications file, the uncertainty pretty much rests with FERC in terms of the engineering information request. And the uncertainty doesn't begin to disappear until you get the notice of intent that FERC is actually going to process the order and gives a timeline for when they might issue the order. Once you get but none of the projects in the US have really been held up long-term by regulatory issues that I've experienced. Generally, the regulatory process gets sorted out long before the owner gets closure on gas sales agreements, gets into feed, gets certainty around EPC timing and cost, and starts to begin to have discussions with the lending community. Generally, the lenders want to see the regulatory certainty in terms of an order. They want to see definitive gas sales agreements, and they want to see an EPC contract and agreement structure that the owner is willing to commit to. And generally, the schedule uncertainty for most projects has been in that phase of the cycle, getting certainty around the availability and the sources of funds. Once you get to FID, generally the uncertainty around regulatory is pretty much disappeared. There is some uncertainty in terms of the authorizations to progress the project that FERC requires. But generally, FERC, if you've got a good EPC and they've been through the process before and they prepare the paperwork correctly, generally you'll get all the authorizations within 30 days. And generally that doesn't hold up the project. So, I think we've all been frustrated at times with the complexity of the regulatory process, the amount of paperwork, the cost, but generally it's not the major uncertainty in the project that I've experienced. Many times it's getting the sourcing of funding, particularly if you've got lenders. Some projects proceed off balance sheet, but most projects here in the US have had to have third-party lenders, and that's been the more uncertain part of the scheduling process.
Thank you very much, Mike. Wow, that was very detailed, very good. And just on the heel of that, let me go to Roberto. Roberto, what regulatory or permitting bottleneck today poses the greatest threat to schedule certainty for LNG projects targeting 2026 FID or execution? And how are leading owners mitigating it early? Roberto.
Good morning, Akin, and thanks for having me. And great introduction from Mike Britton regarding the regulatory environment. We typically focus on the FERC permit as just what you need to go forward with a project. And in reality, FERC is necessary, but it's not the only critical permit. Moreover, FERC will not issue a FERC order without other state permits in hand. In some locations in the US, the real bottleneck today is at the state level permitting, as, for example, agencies like TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or LDEQ in Louisiana, where most of the projects are located in the North America. These air permits remain squarely on the critical path. They are critical, highly technical, frequently appealed, and they tend to move slower than federal permits. It is worth saying that they are much less influenced by federal politics or whether you are operating under an LNG-friendly administration. I would say a second closely related risk is to make late scope changes that could trigger a FERC variance or a formal amendment. Even well-intentioned changes such as equipment substitutions, air emissions tweaks, layout optimizations, or late additions due to market changes could set you back. And this is less of a problem these days with the new administration. I think FERC is doing an excellent job in moving projects forward, but it still can reopen public comment, introduce new environmental reviews, and inject months of uncertainty. One last thing I would like to highlight is to have an incomplete or weak FERC review could trigger additional room for interpretation, and opponents can and most likely will petition to US courts for additional review, as we have seen recently in some of the projects. At that point, the schedule is no longer in the owner's control. So what owners are doing to mitigate this early? Well, we treat FERC filings like litigation documents, fully engineered, internally consistent, and defensible, and not with a lot of placeholders all over the place. The goal is to submit packages that simply cannot be challenged on technical grounds. And we typically like also to start the state permitting early and align design decisions explicitly around the state regulatory requirements and not just federal minimums that are required. So finally, I would say that freezing the scope is very important. I mean, the more solid feed you have, the less changes you will have to do. You will avoid triggering amendments late in the game.
Thank you so very much. I mean, when you bundle those two responses together from Mike and yourself, wow, that's huge. And it was good that Mike walked us through the process steps, especially what must happen and when. And I really appreciate you, Roberto, emphasizing the need for a complete feed, because that's most of the time that's where we get things wrong. We will rush through it and say, "Oh yeah, don't worry, we will fix it later." And depending on what you fail to complete, FERC can actually stop you. But again, we're in an environment today where people at least understand what the expectations are, and they do the best that they can to do what they should do. But before I leave the topic of permitting and regulatory environment, let me go back to you, Mike, if you don't mind. Before then, maybe when I get to the next team, I'm going to start with Javid. So, Mike, just think about it. What practical lessons have you learned about engaging regulators earlier and more effectively beyond formal submission? More so, you've seen this end to end. And if there's any one that could be called the LNG guru, you will probably fit that bill. So share with us, with our audience today, what practical lessons you've learned about engaging regulators early. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, my experience has been that it's very important to engage the regulatory authorities early. Now, it's kind of a double-edged sword in that, the earlier you engage the regulatory authorities, your scope may not be fully defined. And the regulatory authorities also have preferences. And as an owner, you have to weigh the intensity of those precedents. Is it a preference or is it a must-have? And so it can be challenging for the owner. I have seen owners compromise very early and say, okay, we're not going to fight the regulatory authorities. We're going to give them everything they want. Other owners have said, no, this is what we require. This is what we can afford. This is where we're going. And then it takes a longer conversation. But the earlier you engage with the authorities, the more likely it is you're going to understand what they must have and what you're going to have to include in the scope of the project. The longer you delay in engaging with the authorities, the more likely it is that you're going to have late changes that you've got to incorporate in order to get their support and their approval. And what you don't want to be is like an ostrich. You don't want to stick your head in the sand and ignore the importance of the regulatory requirements. So my advice to owners would be to engage with the authorities as early as possible. But you don't have to give them everything they want. I mean, you got to differentiate between what they must have and what they would like to have.
Thank you so very much, Mike. I mean, you touched on something that I'm very passionate about, which is the power of relationships in successful project delivery. And you emphasize the word engaging the authorities early. Especially the regulatory authority. That's very important. So we cannot deliver projects successfully if we don't identify the key stakeholders and manage the relationships intentionally, very well and consistently. So thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to move on to the second theme, which is on EPC market dynamics and contracting strategy. And my objective here, which is our collective objective, is to address risk allocation where theory often fails. And I'm now going to start with you, Javid. And my question for you, Javid, is this. From the contractor's perspective, what makes an LNG project bankable to execute today, not just finance? Javid.
Hey, thank you, Hakeem. And I appreciate the opportunity for the organizers to organize this webinar. And also, thank you for all the participants who have dared to join this webinar today, this morning. It's a good question on the bankability, and bankability is normally relevant to the projects where external financing is needed to support the construction, especially when the owner is a developer with no meaningful balance sheet. IOCs and NOCs, they normally do their large mega projects through their own balance sheet. But whether it is developer or IOC or NOC, the project has to be executable besides bankable. So bankability, executability, and financiability, they all go together.
Mm.
Normally, the EPC contractors, the way the LNG project trend is nowadays, is that EPC contractor is a kind of a solution provider to most of the developers. And even in IOCs and NOCs, they're looking for contractor-led solutions. So when EPC contractor is a solution provider, it contractor needs to provide the solutions which are bankable, executable. And these are very important for owner to have a solution which is bankable. Now, what do you mean by bankability, and how the EPC solution provider makes the project bankable? There are many things involved in that one, starting from, of course, proven technology to be used in LNG projects, which what experience the technology has, what successful record is there, then what is the performance guarantee regime in the terms and conditions with the owner, and then how the project is defined, what's the maturity of the project definition or design development at the time of FID, at the time of taking the project through the feed and pre-feed scopes. Also, how the risks are allocated between the contractor and the owner and different stakeholders. So these are the things which will make a solution bankable. And on the other side, financial lenders, their their perspective is that it has to be bankable and financeable. What that means is that besides the bankability and executability, they are also looking at, of course, credible, credit worthy counterparties like off-takers. They are also looking for what is the sponsor strength, what's the debt equity ratio they're planning, what is their financial performance, and what is their risk allocation that looks acceptable to everyone. So these are the things with finance lenders will be looking at. So lenders are looking at financeability. Financeability depends on bankability. Bankability depends on execution ability.
Okay. No, thank you so very much, Javid. Yeah, I really appreciate the centrality of risk as you emphasize there, because defining each of those, you need to fully understand the risks. So thank you so much. I don't know, Roberto, if you have anything to add, but before you do that, let me just ask you the next question. And then if you want to incorporate some of your thoughts on the answers to that first question, that's fine. But here's my question for you, Roberto. What do owners most often misunderstand about what EPC contingency can and cannot protect them from once a contract is signed? I take that again. What do owners most often misunderstand about what EPC contingency can and cannot protect them from once a contract is signed? Roberto.
That's a good question, Akin. And many owners assume that because contingency is embedded in a fixed price EPC contract, it somehow acts as a buffer for anything that goes wrong. And that's simply not the case. EPC contingency only covers risks the contractor owns under the contract. Things like execution uncertainty, productivity variability, or estimating uncertainty within an agreed and frozen scope. The moment the owner changes the scope, delays the decisions, or triggers a permitting-driven redesign, contingency is off the table, and the meter starts running, and you are, as an owner, open to change orders. Another misconception is that EPC contingency is money the owner can somehow access or reallocate. It is not. Contractor contingency is the contractor's risk capital. Owners don't control it, cannot spend it, and don't get it back if it is unused. So the real protection for owners doesn't come from contingency. It comes from scope, maturity, and discipline. The more complete and stable the scope is, the more effective EPC contingency actually becomes. The projects that struggle are the ones that rely on contingency to absorb uncertainty.
Thank you so very much. Yeah, the subject of contingency is something that is so that is so near and dear to my heart, because in my experience, some of my former colleagues on the call today will probably know exactly the example I'm citing here. I once worked for an executive who asked me, Aki, this project needs no contingency because we know the scope so well. No, you don't need contingency. Actually, and he said that in the midst of a number of people. I was so embarrassed. I will be very honest with you. So I had to go meet this individual one-on-one to say, please do me a favor. Don't say that again in public. If you have points like that, please let's talk about it face to face. That way I can advise you, not educate, but at least advise you. Because I work for you, I'm supposed to be your advisor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Mike,
there is always, you are right, Akin, and there is always, contractor will always miss something, either a regulatory or a standard or a code requirement that the owner brings during the execution of the project. And I mean, the only way is to use the contingency to tackle those type of changes. So you are correct.
Thank you, Roberto. So, Mike, now when you've think about what Jarvis said earlier and what Roberto's response just was, now let's look at today's labor productivity and supply chain volatility. Which EPC contracting models are proving most resilient and which are quietly breaking down in your view? When you look at the labor, the productivity, the supply chain volatility that we experience today. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, all the owners would prefer to get an EPC agreement that is lump sum. And I always try to tell owners, some owners think that all EPC agreements are lump sum. They're not. EPC addresses scope, lump sum addresses commercial compensation. So they're totally separate things. Scope and compensation are totally different. But owners typically prefer, and particularly those that are depending on third-party lender financing, would like a lump sum. And for a while, that was possible here in the U.S. But that hasn't been possible for a number of years now. I don't know of any EPC contractors that are offering lump sum these days. They will lump sum engineering. Some of them will lump sum procurement if they're active in the market and have good access to current pricing and deliveries. But typically, the EPCs these days are going to want some sort of risk protection around labor and things that they don't control, such as tariffs and transportation cost. And now the manner in which they'll protect themselves varies. They can have lump sum plus progressive lump. You can go progressive lump sum. You can have provisional amounts. You can go cost reimbursable on certain elements of the work. So we're seeing many more hybrid type arrangements. We're also seeing a trend where EPC contractors are relying more on a larger number of subcontractors, and that has to do with the fact of the activity level, particularly here in the U.S. We've reached a point where last year we produced over 111 million tons of LNG. We've got another 40 or 50 million tons of LNG under construction, and we've got new projects that are just beginning the regulatory process. Unprecedented level of activity for LNG here in the U.S., and it's stretching all of the resources, the supply chains, labor, equipment supply, So, really, I think everything's on the table now when it comes to contract formats.
Hmm. Thank you so very much. I know you have your views on some of these topics, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to move on now to theme three, which is on schedule, costs, and supply chain risks. And the objective here is to move from reactive to anticipatory execution. And I'm going to start with this with Roberto. And here's my question for you, Roberto. Which single risk is most likely to derail LNG project schedules in 2026, even on a well-planned project, and why? And here's why that question is very important. Well-planned projects. Many people believe that a well-planned project should have near zero risk and therefore no contingency. And that goes back to the example I gave earlier in my career years ago. So, Roberto, which single risk is most likely to derail LNG project schedules and why? Over to you.
Yeah, even a well-planned project with a good feed, the contractor will still put at least a 5% contingency, and also the owner will have to have their own reserves as well for changes in scope, etc. But if I had to pick a single risk most likely to derail LNG projects in 2026, and Mike touched the tariffs. Tariffs is the topic of discussion nowadays. How it's going to impact execution of projects, how some people are deciding whether you use mod yards overseas versus locally. But I believe that supply chain bottlenecks for critical long lead equipment, especially electrical equipment, gas turbines, and other specialty rotating equipment, could be the focus of risk for project schedules. And the issue isn't that owners and EPCs aren't planning for this. It is that manufacturer capacity is fundamentally constrained. OEMs like GE Vernova, Siemens Energy, and MHI, as an example, are sitting on multi-year backlogs driven not just by LNG, but by power generation, data centers, and energy transition projects competing for the same manufacturing slots. These are not components that you can substitute late or recover with field productivity. Gas turbines or electrical motors in an all-electric facility like Freeport LNG sit directly on the critical path. You cannot install an LNG train without them, and certainly you cannot commission without them. When a turbine slips, the entire mechanical completion and startup sequence slips with it. What makes this risk particularly dangerous is the knock-on effect. Late delivery doesn't just move one milestone, it compresses pre-commissioning, stresses interfaces, and forces out-of-sequence work, and increasing startup risk. At that point, even a strong construction team cannot claw the schedule back. In 2026, schedule success is not just about execution excellence. It's about securing manufacturing slots early on, aligning scope around what's actually available, and treating long lead items procurement as a strategic decision, not just a purchasing activity.
Hmm, hmm, Thank you so very much. And most of those I've actually experienced, so I can actually relate to all these real life examples that you all are giving. So thank you so much for saying it that way, Roberto. That was good. Now, with that said, I know Javid, you have a view on this particular question. So let me allow you in about 45 seconds or less, because I know you could talk all day about this. Over to you, Javid.
Yeah, once you give me opportunity, I'll take over all the time. Anyway, I think we are talking about the volatility and EPC contracting models. Beside the contracting models like we talked about on the lump sum or reimbursable or open book estimate and all those things, partially progressive lump sum. There is another side of the contracting arrangement is that, basically LNG projects are all mega projects.
Mm,
And at times, you don't see a single contractor. Of course, there are some exceptions. single contractor taking the whole project risk and project as one contract. So it lends itself to, consortiums, joint ventures, or subcontractors. So these are the different contracting models which you have to account, especially in case of floating LNG. You have to have, you know, um, uh, multiple joint venture or consortium because of the ship and the top sides. But in for onshore construction, also now that the trend is to have modularized construction and mid-scale LNG trains, again it falls into the same category as we have a different contractor, different consortium, different fabrication yards. So these are the different breaking points, as you can say, in the system, in the ecosystem, when you involve multiple entities to execute the project.
All right. Thank you very much, Javid. And I appreciate you. Before I go to Mike, I'm going to go back to you, Roberto, if you don't mind. And the quick question is, which hopefully you can answer in 1 minute or less. When market conditions shift mid-execution, and we know they do, what decision bottlenecks most often destroy value? And what have you seen owners do differently to preserve outcomes? Because as project executives, project execution, people who do project deliver projects, we realize that we focus on executing projects, and all of a sudden you realize that something trips in the marketplace. In your view, I mean, especially in your role right now, when you've experienced this kind of market condition, what would be your advice to our listening audience, particularly from the standpoint of what you've seen owners do differently to preserve outcomes? Roberto.
Well, I would start again by saying that if you are in the middle of execution, and I mean boots in the ground and equipment order, if there are market changes that affect drastically your project, it means you did not do a good job with your design basis and general project execution strategy from an owner's point of view. But things happen, of course, and when market conditions shift mid-execution, the decision bottlenecks that destroy value are almost never technical. They are governance failures. The biggest one, I would say, is decision rights freezing. The project was sanctioned under one basis, but when commodities move, supply chain breaks, or labor productivity collapses, approval thresholds don't adapt. Decisions that used to sit with the project suddenly get pulled back to corporate, and the project goes into a holding pattern. That is where value leaks out, and not because teams are slow, but because no one is authorized to decide. A second bottleneck, it is a change governance that assumes stability. Many owners treat mid-execution changes as exceptions to be minimized rather than signals that the basis of sanction has shifted. The result is delay, rebasing line, incremental approvals, and false precision, all while cost and schedule continue to move underneath. And the last one, I would say, I mean, the third one, a lack of trust between the owner and the delivery system. When owners hesitate or reverse decisions, contractors go defensive. Productivity drops, contingency becomes behavior, not math, and escalation paths clog up. At that point, the project is being administered and not led. So some I see some owners, and we have done this, is setting up a construction decision group and actually make it decide. The strongest owners don't treat this as moving fast. They treat this as protecting their capital. They agree upon upfront on who can decide when assumptions break. So setting up a construction committee that you can enforce to make decisions is key in projects.
Thank you so much, Roberto. I mean, you really pinched me when you said most of the time projects don't fail for technical reason; they fail due to governance. Actually, one of my books that will be released on the 9th of March, as Johnny said in the introduction, Mega Project Development and Decision Making. Actually, addresses that point. So thank you so much for saying it the way it should be said. Now, with that said, Mike, what supply chain assumptions made during FEED are proven least reliable during execution from your experience? Mike.
Yeah, the answer to this question has really changed over the years, but currently I like what Roberto said about supply chain and procurement needing to be based on a strategy and not just a traditional execution. The procurement of long lead items is critical to securing the schedule for the project. We've seen the delivery on rotating equipment move from the mid 20 months out to the 30 and beyond months in terms of deliveries. And so you need to understand where the current deliveries are, and if those are not satisfactory to your execution timeline, then you need to consider a strategy that brings the POs for that long lead equipment back early into the execution and possibly pre-FID. Now, there's a risk in doing this because when you place a purchase order, typically the vendor wants 15% down payment and he wants about 3% a month in progress payments. So if you're ordering $250 to $500 million worth of rotating equipment, that's a pretty large commitment in terms of spend, potentially prior to you achieving FID and having access to the lender's funding. So you have to make sure as an owner that you have the capability of funding those payments and bridging any period of time between when you anticipate being able to take FID and when you're actually able to take FID. Because a 6-month slippage in project will cost you a considerable amount of funding. So I think it's very important to have a good, fundamentally sound premise for your procurement strategy.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, strategy is very, very important. And I've lived that for years across continents in my career, and I can relate to how you've characterized that. Very good. Now, let's move on to the fourth theme so that we can create some time to answer any question that may be in the Q&A box. And the fourth theme, as we all know, is engineering trends, especially modularization, digital, and standardization. And the objective here, gentlemen, is to distinguish value from hype. And there's a lot of emphasis on that in our profession of project management today. We used to talk about the triangle: scope, schedule, and cost. Today, the emphasis is on value. Don't just deliver the scope that I've given you. Don't just deliver on time. Don't just deliver on budget based on the money allocated to you. But make sure that when you are done, I can actually derive value from what you've built. And there's a lot of emphasis. I actually attended a webinar just before this morning through the PMI, and it's exactly on that topic. Now, I will start here with Javid. And Javid, the question I have for you here is, what engineering decisions made early have the highest downstream leverage on schedule and cost certainty? Javid.
Yeah, absolutely. The projects now, that's mega projects on LNG, the first thing you need to make sure you have your hands around is the technology selection. What's the liquefaction technology? What is the boil-off gas? What is the gas treating? And also along with that, major equipment's coming with it. Like, what kind of power is used for the MRC, mixed refrigerant compressor, whether it is electric drive, whether it is gas turbine. All these selections needs to be considered very carefully. And there are factors where why it is electrical and why it is not gas turbine. There are many reasons to do that. But all these selections have to be done way upstream, which is definitely going to affect the cost and schedule downstream. Also, sometimes, the NOCs and IOCs structure, their processes do not allow to have lock in the contractors and the suppliers early, as Mike pointed out, during the feed or pre-feed or pre-FID because of the cost involved. And the decision making with the IOCs, NOCs are far longer as versus developers, which are shorter decision making. So one of the example is like Venture Global, they manage the schedule very good for the projects, and that was done during pre-feed, during conceptual, during feed studies, and even in pre-FID. So there are many things you can do to leverage the cost and schedule downstream by executing the right amount, the right degree of the feed, right degree of definition of the design, right selection of the contractor, right selection of the technology, right selection of the equipments, major equipments.
Mm. Mm. Thank you so very much. Appreciate that. And then just leveraging those answers, I'm going to go to Roberto next, which is the question around how close are we really to standardized LNG designs that reduce execution uncertainty at scale? Roberto.
We talk a lot about standardized LNG designs as the solution to execution risk, and the reality is we have made some progress, but we are not as close as we sometimes tell ourselves, especially at the scale. If you look at the small and mid-scale LNG, standardization is already real. Repeatable liquefaction units, modularized layouts, and OEM-driven packages are reducing engineering hours, field labor, and schedule uncertainty in a meaningful way. But when we move into the large baseload LNG projects, the picture changes. These facilities are typically, they are heavily site-specific. Feed gas composition, emissions limits, plot plan constraints, utility integration, and local permitting still drive customization. Even when projects use the same core liquefaction technologies such as C3MR, DMR, or similar, the surrounding systems are rarely identical. What we have standardized are pieces of the puzzle: equipment specifications, control philosophies, modular construction strategies, and execution playbooks. That helps, and it is absolutely reducing risk compared to where we were 10 or 15 years ago. But it is not the same as having a fully off-the-shelf LNG plant that you can drop onto any site with minimal reengineering. So the honest answer is standardization is incremental, not absolute. It reduces uncertainty at the margins, but it doesn't eliminate it. The owners who succeed are the ones who understand where standardization truly applies and where it doesn't, and then build the schedules, contracts, and risk allocation around the reality, not the marketing narrative.
Thank you so much, Roberto. I really like that. The standardization is an ongoing initiative. It's not a destination. I love that. Thank you so very much. Next, Mike, I'm going to ask you this question. Where has modularization genuinely reduced risk on LNG projects, and where has it introduced new failure modes? Mike.
Yeah, I think this question is different here in the U.S. than it is internationally. Here in the U.S., we have definitely made progress in incorporating modularization into our LNG plant designs. But when I look at it, it's what I call prefabrication. We're not fabricating super large modules, 6 to 10,000 tons. Those are too difficult for us to do here in the U.S. And generally, we don't have the conditions at the site where we can handle 6 to 10,000 ton modules. So the modularization is particularly effective in the small to mid-scale LNG range, as Roberto pointed out, not the larger baseload plants. And the trend, as we've seen at Venture Global and also at Corpus Christi Stage 3, where we're talking about smaller trains in the 1.25 MTPA, those are very much prone to and receptive to small-scale modularization. And that can be done at a number of sites along the Texas and Louisiana border. And that's where I think we're seeing the most effective use of the fabrication technology. And it's typically in the structural and equipment areas. I'm not seeing a lot of extensive implementation of I&E. I know that on the larger international modules, people are pushing for a lot of pre-commissioning in the module before it's delivered to the site. But I don't think we've gotten to the point where we're incorporating a lot of commissioning into the modules that are involved in the U.S. LNG market.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate that. And the last question before we go to our audience Q&A, please, if you're there, you have a question, please drop it in the box. We have about 5 questions already. So, Roberto, let me close this theme with you. And the question I have for you, Roberto, maybe you can just help us in 1 minute or less, is this. Which digital tools are actually influencing project outcomes today versus those still living in presentations? Let me take that again. Which digital tools are actually influencing project outcomes today versus those still living in presentations? Roberto.
Yeah, so those tools that are truly moving the needle are the ones that integrate project controls, completely schedule, cost, and progress, all tied together in near real time. When owners and EPCs have a single trusted view of quantities, productivity, and forecasted completion, they can make decisions early enough to matter. That is having a real impact on predictability. 3D model-based construction planning and digital work packaging is no longer aspirational, it's a reality. On projects where it is done well, it is reducing field rework, improving craft productivity, and tightening interface management, especially on modularized LNG facilities. Also, supply chain is a key at this moment, and supply chain and expediting visibility tools tied directly to the critical path is very important. Given today's lonely equipment risk, like I mentioned before, digital tracking of vendor data, manufacturing progress, and logistics is directly influencing schedule outcomes. This is now from a nice to have to mission critical. So, what's mostly still living in PowerPoint? There is broad claims around AI-driven schedule optimization, fully autonomous construction planning, and digital twins that magically predict project outcomes. Digital twins do add value, but today that value is strongest in handover and operations, not in magically de-risking execution during construction. So the bottom line is this. Digital tools only change outcomes when they are embedded into decision making, not layered on top as dashboards.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Roberto, especially coming from you, who is a senior leader in this industry that sits over operations and project. I mean, maintenance. Yeah, you've seen it all. So thank you so much for distinguishing the benefits, especially with respect to the deployment of digital tools during execution versus operations. Sorry, handover and operations. So thank you so very much, Roberto, and thank you, gentlemen. Very quickly, I know our time is fast spent. We're already behind by about 5 minutes, but that's okay. We'll catch up. Now, here there are 5 questions, and I'm just going to take them. So if we can just answer those questions in maybe 30 seconds or less, that would be great. The first question here came from Atul, and the question is, which execution strategy is better for LNG projects, EPC or EPCM? Who's going to take that? Which execution strategy is better for LNG project? Do you recommend EPC or EPCM?
I'll take a shot at that. I can
go for it, Mike.
I was asked this many times by ConocoPhillips management when I was working for them, and my response was always, I can't tell you. I need to know more about the project. Every project is different. The scope of the project, the market conditions, the strength of the contractors that you might be considering all factor into whether it's EPC or EPCM. And like I said before, EPC and EPC only refers to scope, not compensation. EPCM basically says that you've got a contractor that's managing subcontractors. And there's still a lot to be decided as to how the compensation of those different packages are. So I think this is a very difficult question to answer with any specificity.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. And the next question from actually the same person is, we hear discussion around green LNG. Do regulators insist for green LNG? Do they insist? Do the regulators, do they insist for green LNG? Who's going to take that?
Well, yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
mean,
Roberto.
you have to regulators do not push for green LNG. They push for you to follow the codes and standards and air permit limitations, but it's no different than a few years ago in the Gulf Coast. There is more emphasis on greenhouse emissions, but in reality, that I don't see much push from the regulators to have green LNG. And with green LNG, we think of projects that they are targeting net zero emissions or things like that. I don't see that push being coming from the regulatory side.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And the next question here is from Hemraj. It says, do you see mega projects slowing down due to reduced LNG demand and oversupply of LNG mainly by Qatar? Yes, Javi, you want to take that? Do you see mega projects slowing down due to reduced LNG demand and oversupply of LNG mainly by Qatar?
Yeah, actually, to the contrary of that question, we don't see that LNG project approvals and the developments are slowing down. As you know, these projects are long duration, 4 to 5 years. So anything which we are planning production in 2030 or 2030, they have to start now. So we don't see much of a slowdown because of the LNG pricing or anything. It will go on. LNG demand will increase down the road, and LNG projects will go on. I don't think that there is a slowdown.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Javid. And you build one of these plants for 20 plus years. Yeah, the predictions say that early 2030s there will be oversupply of LNG, but this is given certain expected growth of LNG demand overseas, which could change depending on many factors. So I see more and more mega projects coming because it's the only way to get to a good financeable, a good project that can give you the returns that you would like to see in one of these projects. To have a competitive dollar per million BTU tolling agreement, you have to go bigger in mega projects.
And then
All
the
right.
mega projects are not planned based on transient or instant demand or pricing fluctuation. They're planned for a long duration. So they have to be. I mean, it is not based on small fluctuations, current fluctuations.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you all so very much. I will not be able to take the remaining 4 questions, but we will post it to you all. And if you provide us your response, when we either through LinkedIn or the energy projects space online, we would try and answer the question, especially on LinkedIn. We will try and answer the question. So thank you all so very much for joining today. But before we close this session, and before I do the final wrap up, I would like to ask each of our esteemed panel members to leave our audience with one final thought today. And I'm going to go in this order. Roberto will go first, then Javid, and then Mike will go last. So Roberto, if you are going to leave our audience with one thought today, based on the state of the industry, where we have been, where we are, and where we are going, what would that thought be, Roberto?
A couple of thoughts. Schedule certainty in LNG projects today is less about getting approved, but also about staying approved. Also, the projects that succeed are the ones that eliminate uncertainty before they sign the contract. And lastly, what I mentioned is in 2026, schedule success isn't just about execution excellence, but it's more about securing manufacturing slots early.
Thank you. Javid.
Yeah, no, I didn't talk about the risk and contingency, but to me, for allocating the risk, you have to allocate a risk to the entity which is capable of controlling that risk. Do not allocate risk to a contractor or something which he cannot control. So allocation of risk is very important, and it has to be based on depending upon the capabilities and how the entity can handle it. And the contingency coming out of that one will be reasonable. Otherwise, if you push unnecessary risks to the contractor, your contingency will be very high.
Thank you, Javid. Mike.
Yeah, I want to pick up on what Yavid was just saying about risk allocation and encourage owners to step up and manage their obligations. I see owners trying to push all the risk over onto the contractor. And as somebody said early, the contractor is just a solution provider. They're not in a position to absorb a lot of risk. They don't make a lot of money. Typically, EPC contractors make 7 to 10%. It's the owners who have long-term upside in terms of their economic position, and owners need to step up and assume their fair share of the risk for the things that they control. And they have a big responsibility in terms of putting the organization in place to manage these projects and operate them safely long term.
Thank you so much, Mike. And as we wrap up, one message stands out clearly. LNG's success in 2026 will not come from optimism alone. It will come from disciplined choices, honest risk conversation, and leadership willing to confront uncomfortable trade-offs early. Execution is where strategy either earns its credibility or loses it. I want to sincerely thank our panelists for their candor, insight, and lived experience. Conversations like this only work when people are willing to speak from the field, not from the slides. And thank you again to the organizers of the Energy Project Conference and Exhibition for creating a space where the industry can learn forward together. Today's discussion is just the beginning. I want to invite you all to continue this dialogue in person at the Energy Project Conference and Exhibition, North America 2026, taking place during June 16 and 17 in Houston, Texas, at the prestigious George R. Brown Convention Center, Houston, Texas. For more information on how to register, please visit www.epcshow.com. It will be a deeper, broader forum bringing together owners, EPCs, technology providers, and capital partners to tackle execution realities across energy projects, not in theory, but in practice. I urge you to register today. The projects we sanction today, in my view, will shape energy markets for decades. How we choose to execute them will define our credibility as an industry. Once again, thank you for your time, your engagement, and your commitment to building projects that endure. See you all in June. Thank you very much.